Hello, dear listeners, and a very warm welcome to another episode of Field Notes, the weekly podcast from the Hindu Business Line and all things agribusiness. In the last few shows, we've discussed issues related to entrepreneurship in agriculture. Continuing with that theme, we have on the pod today Subhadeep Sanyal, who is a partner at the venture capital firm Omnivore. Founded in 2011, Omnivore is a VC that is completely focused on funding entrepreneurs in early stage ventures, trying to build the future of agri and food systems. Its portfolio consists of more than 2 dozen companies, ranging from online trading platforms to those who make steamed snacks. Subhadeep himself is a quintessential agri man. He graduated in agri sciences at Haryana's Agri University in Hisar, and he studied agri business management at IIM Ahmedabad. He joined Omnivore straight from campus and has been with the firm for nearly a decade. Welcome to Field Notes, Subhadeep.
Thanks so much, Vivek. Glad to be here.
Subhadeep, as an investor, do you see enough potential in India's food and agri sector to be able to run a fund like this, a specialist firm like this?
Sure, that's a question which we get pretty often, Vivek. I think the short answer is yes. The reason why we think so is that India primarily has been an agrarian country as far as the number of people associated with it are concerned. And a lot has not really changed or been brought up to speed in the last 3 or 4 decades as far as the way business is conducted, the kind of inefficiencies which exist, the general quality of which the stakeholders are. There's not been an upgradation, right? We've seen that across a lot of industries, but I think agri and food is still about just starting out. And given the way demand and supply is behaving, I think in a country like ours, where there's a large growing middle class with more disposable income, there is also a large rural population which is moving and urbanizing pretty fast, and hence the pressure on lesser and lesser land to grow more food exists. I think technology will play a very strong role. And wherever tech plays a strong role in disrupting an industry, I think venture capital as a model has potential. Effectively, what we thought out when Omnivore started, and our belief continues to be pretty strong there. So we're not really seeing pipeline go away.
Like most sectors in India, here too, the numbers are pretty eye-watering. If you look at the scale of the opportunity, if you look at the consumption, the demand projections that you just alluded to, while globally food and agri have been among the most exciting sectors to be in India it is somewhat of what I call a Meena Kumari among industries. It's always part of a dire sob story. Are things actually changing?
So I think because it is such a large space, Vivek, it is fraught with so many stakeholders, both public and private. I think the change is very difficult to see. One anecdotal, but I think a reference which I can give is when we started out about a decade plus ago as Omnivore, trying to do like a crazy thing, bring venture capital to early stage agri investing, which did not exist in India. The kind of people we used to meet who were running traditional agri enterprises, they were very different. Their ambitions were very different. Their way of doing business was very different, as opposed to what you see now, which is we see people who have spent their careers, have trained not as agriculturists, but maybe as computer scientists or as pharma guys or as anything else, as even journalists, come in and trying to attack a problem differently, which they think is long in nature. Now, is it really moving the needle? To answer your question, I think it's very early. Even if you collectively look at the entire agri-tech startup landscape, there are maybe about 1,000 odd companies, 800,000 odd companies in that space. Most of them have started up only maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago. There were very few before that. But I think what these entrepreneurs have been able to do is two things. One, they've been able to inspire another legion of businessmen, of entrepreneurs to kind of jump in and try and work in the space. And secondly, it has also brought on people with capital on the investment side, sit up and take notice that, hey, listen, there is something happening here. There is some organization happening here. There is a kind of shift which is in process. So can we be the early bird here? Which is what practically most investors do whenever a sector looks quote unquote hot. Mm-hmm. So I think that phase is where we are currently.
What is attracting a lot of these entrepreneurs into this sector? Most of the agripreneurs I talk to are either engineers or MBAs who've chucked up cushy jobs elsewhere and are trying their hand at agripreneurship. Why is that happening? Why is it attracting a lot of people who have sort of flying careers elsewhere?
I'll say that let's not put nazar on it, but I think it's a good thing. But in terms of the why, I think there are two primary reasons. Like,
Mhm.
one is from a persona, from a background of entrepreneurs. If I were to think about profiling, there is one kind which is basically, as you explained, that they studied elsewhere, they probably worked also in a different sector, but there is some connection to agri in the family, in the extended family, or maybe their grandparents still farm. So there is one connect, or they've spent their holidays going back to the village and whatnot. So the
Mhm.
problem that they're trying to solve for is at least very first hand. So
Mhm.
that is one, I would say, kind of persona, entrepreneur persona. They might not have studied the space technically, they might not have worked in it, but
Mhm.
there is a problem which they can associate. And they're out there saying that, can we solve for it? Can we do something here? Can
Mhm.
we solve for inefficiency? Can we, in the process, also make money? That is one. The second kind are actually people who have possibly worked with agribusiness companies and
Mhm.
have hence seen opportunities slash problems as a part of their professional journeys. But
Mhm.
being part of a larger company, you're not often encouraged to do your own thing.
Mhm.
So whenever there is more and enough, they kind of jump out and take a stab at this. The third kind is very interesting to see when we see really young teams and like super smart people trying to come in and learn agriculture along the way, or kind of learn the problems along the way. I
Mhm.
think that I would attribute to India not really kind of saying that, hey, listen, startups are a bad thing. And I think for that, we need to thank the larger ecosystem of maybe e-commerce or maybe other segments, which has normalized startups.
Mhm.
Otherwise, if you're from a good engineering college, you're getting a nice job in a tech firm. Seldom did we find maybe 5 years ago people leaving those and joining startups. But now that's
Mhm.
very common. 15-20% of fresh graduates
Mhm.
are working with startups nowadays,
Mhm. Mhm.
and from very good schools with other larger corporate offers. So I think that destigmatization has definitely helped create the third kind of entrepreneurs, which
Okay.
are seeing this as one of the problems they can attack and go at it early without maybe having either worked in it or without maybe having the familial context for agriculture.
Shubhadeep, correct me if I'm wrong, but I see this landscape dotted by companies when they invoke this term food tech or agri-tech. It's dotted with companies who are either delivering samosas through an app, and they call it food tech, or they are in some kind of supply chain business. Is there enough fundamental disruption happening?
I think that's a good question, Vivek. So let me clarify as to what at least we
It's an
mean.
outsider's view.
No,
I must
absolutely.
add with a caveat.
No, no, that's 100% true. So I'd like to distinguish between when we say food tech and agri tech. And as a reason, Omnivore does not call itself a food tech investor. When we think about agri, I think our line stops where the consumer is probably involved, but it's not. I mean, for example, when you think about food delivery as a sector, we don't consider it food tech because it's an operations business. It's a last mile delivery operations business, and that's not something which is agri. For us,
Mhm.
agri is where the farmer, where the producer, where the grower is involved, or immediately one level up from the grower, there is disintermediation that you're causing, there is value addition that you're bringing to the table.
Mhm. Mhm.
Those are bets which are agri tech for us. So if you take food delivery, and we've been vociferous about not calling it food tech and calling it food ops, at least internally. If you take away food ops and you look at the market, you're largely left with people who are doing one of two, three things right now. They're
Mhm.
either helping the farmer or the trader connect to better markets for their
Mhm.
crop out. People who are doing market linkage, quote unquote. The second kind is people who are focused on providing the farmers or the growers with
Mhm.
certain inputs. They could be physical inputs, they could be technological inputs, intellectual inputs, they could be slowly, we're getting there, financial inputs as well. Whatever
Mhm.
they need for their business journey can be provided to the farmer better, cheaper, more accurately, more optimally, ensure there is less spurious material going down and things like that. Those are the problems being solved for as well.
Mhm.
And the third kind is again where folks are looking at completely deep technology related research, where
Mhm.
they're saying that, okay, can I look at a fruit and tell, or do a quick 5 second scan and tell whether it's ready for harvesting or not, whether it has reached a certain bricks content or not, whether this bag of maize, what is the moisture content, can it trade accordingly or not, things like that. But there, I think It's a lot of fundamental research which then blends into the first and second kind of players when it operationalizes. Those are broadly, very, very crudely speaking, what we see as agri-tech. Now, food processing, again, since you mentioned that in our intro as well, I think it plays a very strong role as far as a better income for farmers is concerned, better shelf life, better even for producers and for retailers and the chain. And we're still very small as far as our food processing is concerned as a percentage of the produce that we grow. Not in absolute terms, but as a percentage, it's still pretty small, and a lot needs to be done there. As far as I would say the talk about agri-tech goes, or the general outsider's view about food and agri, when they club food and agri together, unfortunately in food it's largely even the dollars invested or the dollars burnt, if I may, are largely towards us getting a samosa delivered at home. So for us, we don't really consider that as agri or consider that as part of what we do.
Do you think India has the kind of research ecosystem to help support and sustain some of the breakthrough technologies that we would want to see in this sector?
The short answer is there is a lot of infrastructure. But I think, like a lot of other areas, our talent tends to not stick around here. Again, I'll probably give a personal example. In our entire batch, when we were graduating from HAU, most of the folks ended up taking government jobs or banking jobs. There was 10% which wanted to go in for this crazy MBA, which included myself. And the ones who remained basically did their MSc. Similarly, the ones who remained after their MSc did their PhD. There were only one or two folks who chose to do a PhD. What I'm trying to get at is that while the infrastructure exists and there is enough support going into candidates who want to do their masters and PhD and postgrad and whatnot in fundamental research, I think somewhere the linkage with industry, somewhere the fact that you can also do your own startup is not vibrant enough. So I'll be lying if I say that we have fantastic and we have sorted out everything. I think our research systems are great, but they often kind of tend to work in isolation with what the needs of the market are. I think breeders have done a fantastic job in India. If I look at plant breeders, they've done a phenomenal job. There are great varieties which state and central universities come out with. And there are also partnerships with the private sector that you see and them scaling. But beyond that, I think it's very far and few that we see really cutting edge tech from the agri educational and research system, which is translated on the ground. And one of the major reasons, it could be a chicken and egg situation, honestly, and we haven't really given it too much thought, but it could be that talent doesn't stick around, hence there is no outcome. Or the other way to think about it is there's not enough incentive for talent to stick around, and hence, it doesn't develop better.
From an investor perspective, what are some of the trends that will disrupt this space going forward? Where do you see the room for maximum innovation? What are the trends that would shape this space?
So I think when it comes to innovation and disruption, I would maybe try to draw a fine line between them. There might be a lot of innovations which in itself are not that wondrous, but the disruption that they cause, the positive disruption that they cause is fantastic. And there might be something which is extremely innovative from a scientific bent of mind, but that does not really cause a massive impact in the market. So when we think about Indian ag, I think we see more cases of the first kind. The innovations required are kind of logical, incremental. Most of them are around how can we plug for inefficiencies, how can we solve an operations problem largely.
Matching demand and supply.
Matching demand and supply itself is a very sticky problem, and it will take people enough time to solve for it. The next one could be, can we predict prices? Can you predict demand? Can you predict supply? Can you do a price prediction algorithm which is somewhat accurate so that farmers can in time plan their produce, or a processor can in time plan how much they want to run their plant, things like that. I think that is what we will aspire towards becoming as and when more and more data becomes prevalent in the space. In terms of like hardcore disruptions, one clear area where we see this coming through, there's of course enough and more happening as far as remote sensing is concerned and satellite images, and
that seems to be a really hot area of precision agriculture and spectral imaging.
Correct. I was coming to that, right? Spectral imaging, which can help you determine the quality of the crop, even pre-harvest and post-harvest, quality of soil for that matter, using hyperspectral. Those are, I think, strong research. There are very good teams working on it. That's, I think, positive. But I think for disruption to happen, there is still time for these guys. Maybe in the next 5 years, we'll see them disrupt faster. I think the other piece has generally been that tech which is built on top of growing mobile phone penetration and internet usage. That is basically how you could translate a lot of this to the user. So it's a means to get to farmer and to somebody in the agri ecosystem. But I think that also is going to come up with a lot of potential business models. The one thing which we haven't yet scratched the surface is, I guess, organized finance, credit, organized finance. I think that is going to be a massive opportunity which opens as in when we build these data blocks and we build some history. That's what actuarial guys need. And more of these platforms that we see in agri today, I think as they scale, as they become more focused, and as the same stakeholder comes back again and again and builds out histories with them, I think we'll see credit also play a very, very strong role and see some very large companies emerge in that, what we don't do today or what we don't have today.
In terms of the evolutionary curve, how would agri-tech or food tech and agri-tech space compare with, say, another hot and happening sector like edutech?
There are some signs, I think, are kind of parallel. If you all look at edutech, I think one of the key drivers for the way the industry has grown has been in many places it was that the existing system was broken to the extent that maybe the teacher-student ratio was really terrible. Maybe the kind of content being used in a classroom pedagogy was really old and relevant and not really up to the mark, was not engaging. Multiple problems. And one of the ways in which most of the edtech guys have at least started to solve or are solving for it is to take it direct to the user. Most of the edtech guys which have scaled are basically saying that, okay, we will become like a bridge where content will talk to the end user directly. And then there are different models, of course, around it. But everyone is using digitization, everyone is using mobiles, everyone is using a direct funnel to reach and talk to the person who needs to affect the change. And hence, it is also a very primary requirement. As, again, to my point, as more and more India really moves up in income, everybody wants the next generation to read better, learn better, and have best tools at their disposal to do the same. I think a similar, if not exact, but somewhat similar journey right now we're seeing in agri as well, where the next generation of agriculturists, whether they've been folks who have been in that business for generations or people like me who have kind of chosen to work in the space, I think they're all realizing that there is this new way of doing business. We are seeing so many farmers searching. If you opened up any YouTube, Facebook kind of group, you will see dedicated farmer to farmer interactions happening. They might not be super organized right now, but like there are channels with millions of viewers and subscribers who are looking out for certain specific inputs, certain specific advisory, looking out for better markets for their produce, looking out for labor. So the ask is there. Now the point is how fast and in what shape and form will you fulfill that ask? That's where I think agri also is, and digitization is a very, very strong backbone on the basis of which this change will get affected. Now, being in agri, you can't really solve everything digitally. That is maybe one small difference between agri and edtech. There is a physical produce which has to be grown, there is a physical fertilizer which has to be applied, and there is a physical harvesting that you have to do and move it, and so on and so forth. So it will remain a what we call phygital universe, physical plus digital universe. But I think that parallelism is what we're now seeing. I also think that it's probably going to take slightly longer. It's not all rosy always, right? There are incentives and misincentives which abound the space. There are subsidies which are given out which might tweak the incentive of the farmer. There is informal credit which is crushing a lot of farmers and not enabling them to kind of move to other alternates. So it's not as simple as just taking another subscription. To that extent, I think it will take longer for it to see some more scale the way edtech has been.
How long before we encounter the first agri or food tech unicorn?
Again, so food tech unicorns are there. If I debunk it and say food ops unicorns are there, I think with agri and food sector, our sense is, I think definitely within the next 18 months or 24 months, you'll see the first unicorn. Definitely. Okay. Should be earlier, but definitely within that. Not first. I think we'll see 2-3 unicorns emerging within the next 2 years.
Any clues as to which sectors, subsectors they may be in?
I think the first crop of such unicorns would definitely be platforms, whether they are kind of farmer-focused platforms or more mid-mile oriented platforms, which are working on market linkage plus maybe financing or maybe inputs. Some names which come to the fore are, possibly a Ninja Cart, Waycool, or a Dehat. Folks like Arya will also kind of follow. A Samunati, which is more finance-led, is one strong contender as well. So we'll see at least, a few guys emerging from this and reaching that. The interesting thing here again is that most of the agri, and this is building into the future, but that's kind of what we do for a living. Most of the companies that you'll see in agri reaching a certain milestone, like quote unquote unicorn, will also be backed by very strong numbers as far as their growth is concerned or their reach is concerned, which is sometimes very different from other sectors where there might be a top line, but the bottom line is completely non-existent or does not really have a future. Sustainability is always in question. It's a deep dark hole sometimes. We don't foresee that in agri beyond a point. I think that is one other slight advantage which agri holds, is that it's a more resilient space. The disadvantage is that you possibly can't grow 50x in 1 year, which you might do if you're an edtech company or if you're in fintech or what have you. Because at the end of every agri company is a biological supply chain which works in a certain pace.
That kind of giddy hyper growth perhaps not possible.
Is perhaps not possible. Yes, I think it's all about what base you're thinking from. If you're doing a few lakhs a month, of course that's possible. If you're doing a few crores a month, I think that slows down. If you're doing a couple of 100 crores a month in business, then moving from that to a couple of thousand is not possible within a 2-month time frame. Because as I said, this is real revenue. There is actually movement which has a certain time associated with it, which has to follow.
What are some of the things that you look for in a new venture or an entrepreneur while making the investment decision? And does it differ in this sector, or are the traits common across all sectors? It is agnostic.
I think some of the factors remain the same. For example, one thing which most investors would look for is, has the team or has the entrepreneur understood the problem they're trying to solve well? Basically means that have they spent some time validating what their thesis is? Do they know how deep it runs? Is it a peripheral problem? Is it just another case where you're aping somebody else and where the trend is? Or do you genuinely have a grip on what you're trying to solve for? I think that is a very, very strong evaluation that we always do, irrespective of sector. The second is, of course, kind of the pedigree of the team, what their motivations are, what kind of work have they done in the past, what kind of schools have they gone to, what kind of rigor are they used to, can they inspire others to join in? At the stages where we come in is a very lonely journey. You're bootstrapped largely and you're trying to build great team and you don't have currency. You don't have people to pay salaries. Even after funding, you can't really pay the market many a times, right? So can you really inspire others to join your journey? I think that is a very, very important trait in entrepreneurs that we all look out for. And again, I think this is irrespective of sector. As far as I think business models are concerned, or let's say revenue projections are concerned, everyone has a different metric. Given that we come in early, mostly we come in early. We, as Omnivore, we come in anywhere between seed to Series A largely, and selectively into rounds later than that. I think we tend to do a lot of our work more around the founder and the problem and the TAM and things like that, and less around financial modeling, because it's a lot to do with, is this a real problem? And there's a lot of ground validation that happens. I think that is one aspect where agri might differ from other sectors, where there is already a lot of data available for you to validate whether this thesis is real or not, or whether this is a genuine problem or not. In agri, that data is often not there. So you have to travel a lot more. You have to, I guess, speak to stakeholders on the ground a lot more during diligence as compared to some of the other sectors. As far as entrepreneur evaluation is concerned, I genuinely don't think we look out for anything more. One aspect that we sometimes do look out for, and maybe that's something which other sectors don't need to, is the entrepreneur kind of patient. Because given that this sector might require you to stick around for a few more years, might not be a 3 or 4 year journey, which many other sectors you see unicorns zooming in like 3rd, 4th year of their inception. That might not happen in agri. So for us, we also try and look out for entrepreneurs who are doing this with a slightly long-term view. Those would be some of the things, Vivek, which I think largely any investor would look out for. But the last and most important one, I think, which we don't talk about enough, is of course the ability to exit. And that's important for any VC ecosystem to be good at. And exits when you're investing is largely built around like a thesis that, okay, if A, B, C happens, then D might happen. And it might happen in 1 or 2 ways. But at least like having a viewpoint is important while evaluating that, okay, how does this exit? It can't be just all up in the air. You need to have a thesis. Will it not change? Chances are it might. There are also sometimes that regulations might throw you a spanner in the works. you need to pivot accordingly. So I think that is fine. But as long as you do have that as one of your outcomes, and you have the entrepreneur aligned to the fact that, hey, listen, I'm with you for the next maybe 5 years, 7 years, but at some point we will need to get out. So that alignment is very important to do up early. And you need to have entrepreneurs who are okay with that. And that's perfectly fine. There are entrepreneurs who are perfectly happy in running a business, running like an SME, which makes a lot of money, but they don't like too many questions or too many people in and out, etc. Which in case, should signal to you that, hey, listen, this is not really a venture model, then you're happier doing this at your own pace.
Sabr ka phal meetha hota hai truly holds good for this sector, I suppose.
Well, yes, sabr ka phal generally meetha hota hai. Yes.
Thanks a lot, Subhadeep, for joining us.
फल सड़ भी जाएगा ना पेड़ पे. So that's also important.
Yeah.